Hi, I'm Phil Dituri, the Director of Education at FiCycle, and today I'm going to be walking you through this growing cash flows spreadsheet. This is probably the hardest spreadsheet you're going to be doing in our training, and I want to walk you through it so that when you're doing it, you're coming at it from a place of understanding, having already seen it, because it can be very confusing your first time looking at it. So what we're doing here is we're actually answering a question in this spreadsheet. We're answering it in two different ways, directly with one calculation, and then using all these cells here. The question we're answering is if I make a series of 20 payments where the first payment is $3,500 and then I grow each payment by 5% from that number. And all the while, I'm making these payments into an account that's accruing interest at 8%. How much will I have at the end of my 20 payments? So one way to do this is to recognize that each of these payments form a geometric sequence, and that the answer to this question is a geometric series. You can just sum all those terms. To do that, you would need to use the formula for summing the terms of a geometric sequence, which is something most people learn in Algebra 2. You would need to do a little bit of algebraic manipulation to make sure that you have something that looks like something you can substitute into that formula. And then you'd end up with something that looks like this. And you would get this answer that at the end of the day, you're going to end up with $234,226.92. You can also do this to arrive at that same answer. And I believe that this method is easier. I also think more of your students are likely to understand it. And as an educator, it offers us a number of opportunities to interrogate the problem, to ask questions about what we've created to answer the problem, and to even check our answers. So let's have a look at it and see what's actually going on. So here, what we're doing, the big insight is that instead of doing the problem all at once, what we're going to do is we're going to track each payment separately. One way to envision it is to pretend you're making each payment deposited into its own account. And then we're going to add up all those accounts at the end. So let's see what I mean. The first question we need to sort of address, the first sub-problem that we need to solve is what is each payment? Now, it's pretty simple, right? The first payment, we already know it's 3,500. And we know that that payment is going to grow by 5%. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually keep track of its growth separately from the actual payment. So we're going to say that the growth factor for our first payment is 1. You're going to see this is a simple compound interest equation. So for the next year, it's going to grow by 5%. It's going to become 1.05. So what's actually happening? Let's look under the hood here. So you see that we have a simple compound interest formula here. It's 1 plus 5%, the growth rate, raised to the power of the payment number minus 1. And that's because in our first year, we know our payment is just what it is, 3,500. It hasn't grown at all. And so 1 minus 1 is going to give us an exponent of 0. We're going to get 1 here. But in our second year, we're going to end up with our second payment. We're going to end up with 2 minus 1 in our exponent. The exponent's going to end up being 1, and we're going to raise this value by 5%. So for every dollar that we've deposited in our first year, in our second year, we're going to be depositing $1.05. Another way of saying that is we actually deposited $3,500 in our first year. And so in our second year, we're going to deposit $3,675. Or in our second payment, we'll be depositing $3,675. You can think of each of these payments if you want as you're making one payment a year over 20 years, assuming that compound interest is only happening at each year annually. So let's keep going. So we figure out our payments, we can keep going, right? What does it mean that in our 20th payment, the growth factor is 2.53? Well, it means that for every dollar I deposited in my first year, I'm depositing $2.53 in my 20th. Or for every dollar I deposited in my first payment, I'm depositing $2.53 in my 20th payment. Now, because I actually deposited $3,500 for my first payment, I'm going to be making a payment of $8,844.33 in my 20th payment. We can also ask questions. We can prod our students' understandings of this and say something like, well, what does it mean that the growth factor is 180 in the 13th year? Well, it means that for every dollar I deposited in my first year, I'll be depositing $1.80 in my 13th year, or in my 13th payment. Now, I actually deposited 3,500. So 3,500, let's look at the actual formula I have here. So 3,500 times this 1.08 is going to give me the value of my 13th payment, which is $6,285.50. Okay, so we've solved the first subproblem, right, in these two columns. We've calculated what are each of our payments, right? And we even have some understanding under the hood where we can see exactly how much our payments have grown, right? It's almost a little more than 2.5 times in our 20th payment what our first payment was. Okay, now, once we've got all our payments, remember the insight that we're going to do is we're going to track each payment separately. So in this case, you can see that the first payment was 3,500, and it's going to grow by this future value factor. So how do I figure out what that number is? Well, it's a simple compound interest formula, again, not unlike the growth factor, except it's a little different. In this case, we're using the term number for our exponent minus the payment number that we're actually on. So the total number of payments we're going to make minus the payment numbers, that's the exponent. And then the rate is different. It's the interest rate. It's 1 plus 8%. So here, our future value factor is telling us that for every dollar we deposit in our first payment, we will have $2.34 by the end of this growing cash flow, by the end of this series of payments, by the end of these investments. At the end of our investment, right, this 3,500 will become 3,500 times 4.3. It will become $15,104.95. In our second year, there's going to be less time for things to grow. How much does this have to grow? Well, 20 minus 1 is 19. It has 19 years to grow. Our second payment's only going to have 18 years to grow. And growing at 8% for 18 years, every dollar we deposit in our second payment will become $4 by the end of our investment. So in this way, we're going to track each individual payment. And we can simply calculate the future value of any payment by looking at it and saying, all right, let's see, what does it mean that our future value factor is 2 for our 11th payment? Well, it means that for every dollar you deposit in your 11th payment, you're going to make $2 at the end of your investment. So this $5,701.13 becomes $11,396.51. These are a little bit rounded in case you're wondering why it's not perfect. So now, the thing that's nice about this is it has some checks built in. If I didn't program my growth factor correctly, then 1 won't be the first growth factor. 1 should always be my first growth factor because this hasn't had any time to grow. Similarly, your future value factor should just be going down over time because you're giving your money less time to grow when you make payments later in the payment series. And at the end here, you can see that the final future value factor is 1 for our last payment. Why is that true? We can think about that. There's a good answer to that. It's because, well, we've given it no time to grow. So we make a payment of $3,844.33, and that's exactly what it's worth at the end of our investment because we made it at the end of our investment. So you know that you did the future value factor right, or one hint that you probably didn't do it wrong is if you end up with 1 in your final payment. Similarly, 1 should be your first payment for the growth factor. And you can ask questions about these growth factors, which help either increase or audit our students for understanding about what's actually happening in these problems. You can try this yourself on the next tab. Okay, there's a number of places here where you can try it. Again, in your growth factor, you're going to make sure you're using the growth rate. In your future value factor, you're going to make sure you're using the interest rate. And you're going to be tracking each payment separately so that you're going to have to sum all of your deposits at the end when you're done. And this time we're going to be doing it for its total 40, a 40-term investment. You're going to be making 40 payments. The first payment is going to be $5,000. And then you're going to grow that first payment by 2.32%. Each payment is going to grow by that. And all the while, the money that's actually already been in the investment is going to be growing at 8.4%. So I want you to go ahead and please try to calculate this. When you're done, if you want, you can look at the alternative method, which I'm not going to go over right now. It's calculating it more directly, probably as you may have originally thought you might do the problem. You can read this to learn all about it. If anything I said was confusing, please come back here and read this to go over it. This explains it. You don't really need everything I just said to you, but I wanted to help frame this for you so that you could make the most of your time in this training and so that you could feel like you really understand it. So as you go through it, please try to do this on your own. Please don't be shy to check back. If you finish early, please go ahead and try to do the alternate method and problem number 2. But don't worry if you can't do this. I really want you to focus your efforts on this. Only try the alternative method if you feel like you really understand this first method.